So we are getting on tonight to talk about Hurricane Florence. I'm Veronica Butcher. I am president and CEO of Harmonizing Strategies. I am based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, which is in the bullseye target right now for part of the storm, possibly not. We'll talk about that. My longtime friend and colleague, Karina, is in Miami, Florida, and has a very long background in meteorology, having worked at NOAA and also worked with the emergency management for Miami-Dade County. And so tonight we wanted to spend some time just answering some questions we've been getting about the hurricane and what might happen or may not happen, and also how climate change may be playing a factor in this. So why listen to us? Well, we've been working on climate change for myself over 10 years. I served as the Energy and Environment Advisor in the governor's office here, also worked very closely with emergency management. We are passionate about this. Karina herself has lived through a couple hurricanes, which she will talk to you about as well. And we are very committed to creating safe spaces for people to explore the issue of climate change. This is a passion Karina and I share. I like to refer to it as the purple lane in politics. I believe that there's some issues that have gotten branded either a red issue or a blue issue, and they're really not. And I think climate change and children's health are issues like that. So we're excited you're joining us on our first Facebook Live. We've been talking about doing a Purple Lane related Facebook Live for a while, and this presented a perfect opportunity for us. So we will get started at, oh, I forgot to say, we are not here to debate climate change. So I just want to go ahead and clear that up right now. For us, climate change is not a debate. If you came here looking for a debate, you're in the wrong place. But we wish you well in finding your tribe and your community. And tonight we're going to just jump right on in. So Karina, thank you so much for making time. I know you've had a very busy day.
Hi, Veronica. Hi, everyone tuning in. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully you can learn a little bit about what we're going to talk about and ask us your questions, share your concerns. But, you know, just know that for all of you in North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, I'm wishing the best for you, and everyone is in my thoughts and my prayers. And I know that if you're taking the right precautions and you're preparing, then you'll be safe, and you'll make it through the storm.
So let's just jump right into some of the questions you and I were talking about. You know, the first one is about the track. The track of the storm keeps changing. I swear, every time I look at the TV or the computer or my phone, there's a different shift in the track. And since I am in Raleigh, North Carolina, you know, I was telling you before, a friend of mine who's a river keeper out east, she posted a song, and, you know, should I stay or should I go? You know, so I am preparing to shelter in place, and I'm also preparing to evacuate. I'm a single mom. I work from home. I have a 6-year-old son. So I am trying to get my business sorted out. I'm also trying to figure out, like, what happens if we stay here or if we evacuate. So with the track changing so much, can you talk to us a little bit about why does the track change so much, and when do we tune in to, like, okay, this is most likely the track?
Yeah, so I think in the meteorology world and in the hurricane forecasting world, the saying is that in forecasting the track is hard, but what's more difficult is intensity forecasting, because these systems they're known as heat engines, and they're quite honestly, if you look at the physics and you want to geek out, they're almost nearly perfect heat engines. So forecasting what happens there is still not completely understood, but we're making progress. And all my colleagues who study hurricanes here in Miami at the National Hurricane Center and everywhere, and the research institutions are making progress. But the intensity has been challenging because basically a hurricane exists on its own, but where it's going really depends on weather systems, and sometimes that haven't even formed. So right now, the reason I think that the hurricane track has been shifting is because it really depends on a system that just yesterday was still in the northwest Pacific. And so it hasn't really arrived yet. So we don't know the timing of that particular weather system is going to determine really how far north or how far west or how far east this system moves into the Carolinas. So we do know that the general projection is going to be, there's no way that it's not going to impact the Carolinas, unfortunately. So that's unfortunate news. But really, it's because of different weather systems that that are still have yet to arrive that will determine where this system will go. But the impacts, we know that there's going to be rain. We know that storm surge is going to be a big issue for the coast. Even us down here in Florida, we're going to be seeing some increased swells and water buildup along our coast. So you're not alone, but we know that those are the impacts. And so that's what we have to prepare for. Either way, this is a really big storm. And whether you get a direct hit or not, that you are going to be impacted. Even some places in as far north as close to DC and Virginia have begun to take preparations for this storm. So it's a serious threat, and we need to prepare as best we can.
So the size related to other hurricanes, you hear, there was an article the other day on the local news channel here. It's like rare intensity, and I've seen the satellite images, but the satellite images to me, I'm like, I can't compare it to anything. They're not putting them side by side like a Katrina or Harvey. Can you give us a little bit of a context of like the governor today said this is a monster storm. So, as far as like when we see those satellite images, how do we contextualize that? Like, is this really a monster? Is this bigger than Katrina and Harvey?
I don't know the exact, I haven't had a chance to look at the latest, size of the storm, which basically means how far out the conditions of, tropical storms extend from the center of circulation. So that's that eye that you see on radar and visible and satellite imagery. But I think I saw one of your local weather forecasters today. I saw one of his videos, and he kind of drew a dot, and it pretty much covered all of North Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it definitely is a big storm. It's not a small, compact storm like a Category 5 hurricane that I experienced when I was young, which was Hurricane Andrew. But it's bad news because it means that the impacts and the winds are certainly extending very far out, and that will impact a large number of people. I think some of the numbers that I saw earlier this morning or last night were that was mandatory evacuations for 1 million people. So that just gives you an idea of how big the storm really is.
Yeah. Hey, Mac, thanks for joining us. And Jason, so we have a question, Karina, here for Jason's asking, have you ever heard of HAARP? I don't know what that is. HAARP. Jason, can you tell if you're still on, can you give us a little bit more than that? Well, yeah, and our governor actually today issued the first ever state evacuation order, which typically they leave it to the local authorities to issue the evacuation notices, and they're pretty sure it's the first ever in state's history for the Outer Banks to be evacuated. He wanted to just add to the urgency of that. So that's the track. So it sounds like we just have to be patient and wait and see, but we're in for something. What we're not quite sure. So the other thing was this conversation tonight that started about this catastrophic model from the European model. So we hear all the time the American models, European models, and then you have all the different colored lines and dots. Can you explain to us a little bit this one model that shows it stalling out, shifting south, and just spinning and generating like 3 feet of rain for eastern North Carolina and South Carolina? How realistic is that, and how do these models get so off?
Yeah, so modeling, like I said, hurricane intensity forecasting and track is really difficult. The European model in particular in previous years and up until now has proved very reliable. But with some of the forecasting and some of the discussion that's coming out of the National Hurricane Center, and please everyone visit their website, www.nhc.noaa.gov. They're on social media as well. Is that this model is maybe something funky is going on with it. Usually there's models like the American model and the European model, but there's also what they call ensemble models. And those are basically averages of all these models. And usually the average of something is better than than one particular thing, and that's definitely the case with these models. So while the European model is showing this particular scenario, which of course anything is possible, but it's looking unlikely, fortunately. But the ensemble models are definitely hinting at a little bit of what the forecast track looks now. And of course, when you see that cone from coming out of the Hurricane Center, everyone should really understand that that doesn't necessarily represent the size of the storm. It's only where the center of circulation, so that eye that you see on visible imagery and satellite, could go. So if you're out of that cone, doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe from the impacts. And like earlier, I stressed that it's a very large storm. Now, these models, they get better with the more data, because you have to start the model at an initial condition. And of course, if you know what's happening now better, with more accuracy, it's going to provide a better outcome. So we have the hurricane hunters, which, and then we also have NOAA research planes these are the people that go in and around the hurricane, take data, drop, they're these little tubes, and they're called dropsondes. And so they drop them out of the plane, and on its way down, it takes measurements. And all this data is compiled and put into these very powerful supercomputers.
Does the tube come back up, or is it just gone?
It's gone.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it actually has GPS. So sometimes if it doesn't fail, you can actually track the exact path that it took. And so it's collecting wind data, it's collecting temperature data, dew point temperature, so how humid it is, and then the direction of the wind. And so they're really pretty cool. And so it takes all this data, and the more data we have, we're also taking data from buoys, which are out in the ocean, because it's closer to where we have a buoy system. And so we're taking all those initial conditions to provide a better initial condition for these models. And so that's why sometimes when it's out in the ocean, it's a little bit more difficult. But now that it's getting closer to land, and that we have our Air Force hurricane hunters and our NOAA planes taking samples of what the atmosphere is around this storm, we're going to get better and better model data coming out.
So this average of the ensemble models, is that how we end up with like the one red line with a little swirl as like the path, when you still have like all these other squiggly lines around it? They take like, is that where that comes from? Because I was wondering that today. I'm like, well, how did they pick this one in the middle, that this is the path?
Yeah. Okay. So usually, because each model, it's not like each model presents like one scenario. Depending on the model, you can have all those squiggly lines are the different scenarios from like one model. So like, I think, I don't remember the exact numbers, but like the European has like 30 something members. So you get 37 different squiggly lines.
Wow.
And so basically the ensemble is the average of those lines.
Okay.
So that's
hey, Laura. Hey, Jackie. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone.
And Laura, family, kids. I heard y'all are all around the table. Y'all were learning about hurricanes today. Thanks for joining us. So, okay. So y'all, if you have questions for Karina, please pop them in the chat box. We've just been talking about the track and like, where's the track come from and why is it changing so much and everything. If we don't see a question from y'all, we'll go on to the next one, which, thanks, Patricia. Thanks for joining. The track shifted south and west today and is heading towards where I'm from, Western North Carolina in the Appalachian Mountains. Looks like they're going to get more than what we were thinking yesterday when it was shifting more north and was going to kind of go up through Virginia and away from the mountains. So you and I, you were saying something to me yesterday when we came up with this whole idea to do this live about how a hurricane interacting with the mountains can actually potentially make the rainfall worse. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so the mountains, I think, end up being a blessing and a curse, because usually when you have mountains, and so when you hear about hurricanes in the Caribbean going over Hispaniola, and they're like, oh, the mountains are good because it disrupts the center of circulation of a storm, so it actually weakens it. But in this case, what we're most concerned about with the mountains in Western North Carolina and of course through Virginia and South Carolina, is that this will actually might end up intensifying the amount of rainfall, because it provides basically the air is going up the mountain, right? And so that's providing what we call lift, which is basically the air is rising, and that actually enhances rainfall. Because the storm is already going to be there, we already have the conditions, and as the air rises up the mountains, then it can create additional rainfall potential. And I know that you mentioned to me what was going on, what's been happening in Raleigh and in the Carolinas, that you've seen a wetter than normal summer. And so
yeah, and it's been raining, you know, for my North Carolina folks on here can talk about how it rained, it downpoured today, it downpoured yesterday, and it downpoured the day before. So the ground here is already saturated, you know, so, and this is what we saw ahead of Hurricane Matthew, where we had just heavy rains just a week. I think it was within like a week before Matthew came. So the rivers were already swollen, and when Hurricane Matthew hit, the water, you know, it was just like a big pylon. You know, there was nowhere to go but to flood.
Yeah, and unfortunately, with what you've told me and with what I've read with some of the products coming out of the local weather service office, is that the ground is already saturated. And so this storm in particular, some of the forecasting has seen that there can be isolated areas that get more than 15 to 20 inches of rain. And so the ground is already wet. It's going to have nowhere to go. The rivers are definitely going to be swollen, and we're going to see the storm surge pushing additional ocean water in through these rivers. So we're talking about some serious flooding in lots of different areas, because the ground is already saturated, and the water has nowhere to go but up.
So one of the key points about all this is climate change, right? So one of the questions, you know, is climate change affecting the storm? And, you know, can you talk to us a little bit about how climate change has been playing into the downpours, and how you see it possibly impacting the storm or contributing to the development of the storm?
Right. And so let's just, let's be clear that we can't necessarily attribute one individual extreme weather event to climate change, but what we can say with definitive scientific evidence is that the warmer atmosphere that has been caused by increasing carbon pollution is making the air warmer, and warmer air has the ability to hold more moisture. So that's why it's so humid down here in the summer where I live, and I'm sure the
Here
same
too, girl. Oh, yeah.
Too, right? So it has more capacity for this moisture, so that in turn leads to more precipitation associated with these hurricanes. We saw that with Harvey. Not only did it stall out, but it was in the Gulf, where it's got lots of moisture to pull from. And so we're seeing increased rainfall associated with storms. In terms of also one of the main points where we know where scientific evidence has shown that it's also an impact is that we're going to see higher storm surges. And that's just basically because the ice in Greenland is melting and sea levels are rising. That's more true than where I live here in Miami. And so we're going to see higher storm surges associated with these storms. So let's say, for example, the sea has risen 4 to 6 inches. We're going to see 4 to 6 inches more on top of what if this storm would have occurred pre-rising sea levels.
So I have two questions from that. One related to stalling out of storms, and one about sea level rise. So let me start with the sea level rise, and we'll come back to stalling. So one of the things, and I've learned over the years, is that a lot of people, we talk about the sea has been gradually rising, but what I think a lot of everyday folks don't know is how storm surge is a part of sea level rise, in the sense that with storms like this, you can see a lot of areas where it doesn't actually go back out, which is what we saw with Hurricane Sandy, right? There were a lot of places in New Jersey, a lot of people don't know this, where people never went back. and it's all natural area again now, because a lot of those areas, the water just couldn't get back out or didn't get back out. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about sea level rise with these storm surges and in places that may not have water recede back out?
Yeah. So basically, storm surge is the winds, the very strong winds from storms pushing water on shore. So it's, you know, it's kind of thinking of your piling water up into an area, and that definitely happened in Sandy, like you said, and that's going to happen here in North Carolina, in the Carolinas along the coast. Some of the storm surge values that are coming out are 13 to 15 feet in extreme places. So what we're seeing is that, so if you imagine the storm coming through the banks, and I know that there was one that was referenced in some of the stuff coming out from
Hazel?
one of your local
1954 Hazel was the big one that they're comparing it to, that we haven't seen anything like this since Hazel.
Yeah. And so if Hazel were to happen, I'm sorry, I lost my phone.
It happens.
Yeah, if Hazel were to happen today, the storm surge that was associated with Hazel would be higher, and that's just because we've seen a gradual increase in the level of water. And so let's say that the worst storm surge in Hazel was 13 feet in some places. Now it would be 13 feet and 6 inches, let's say, if sea level rise has risen 6 inches since the 50s. That's just an example. Those aren't actual numbers. So we're going to see, yes, it might be minimal, if it sounds minimal, but it definitely makes an impact, and will continue to make an impact with future storms.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So any questions from our audience?
I'm really curious to know what that harp was.
I don't know. I guess he's not on anymore. If he comes back, we'll circle back to it. So the next question is, so I was going to circle back about Harvey and stalling out. So when they first started talking about the potential of this hurricane hitting North Carolina, I think it was over the weekend, there was a potential for a stalling out to happen. And, you know, days and whatnot. We talked briefly when you were talking about the track earlier today about a potential stalling out off the coast, but this was an inland stall out with the mountains. So, you know, how often, I mean, is that something that typically can happen, or is that play back into what you were talking about with, like, it just depends on what's going on with these systems in the Gulf, and like how they, like, are they going to come through and push it out, or like what is there, like a recipe for like something that's going to stall versus something that's going to blow on through?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, the hurricanes are where they move is driven by weather patterns. And so, for example, if we have for example, this happens a lot later on in the hurricane season, like in October, November, where we have cold fronts that start to come down. Some of them just stall and they don't move. That is what's called a blocking pattern. So it's where the system doesn't move because it doesn't have anything to help carry it along. So think of the atmosphere. The atmosphere really is like a river. And so in some places the current is stronger, in some places it's slower, but you know, where this system moves needs to be pushed. It needs to be handheld, basically, because the system itself is going to exist, but where it goes and how it moves is definitely determined by what's going on around it. So if a system kind of comes over and just stays there, and that's what you were in the European model, that's what it was showing, but really it depends on the weather systems around the storm.
Okay. So let's see. Oh, so the Harvey flooding, why was that so bad other than the stalling out?
Yeah, so the stalling out was definitely, I think, the number one factor, because it just continued to dump rain because it was pulling the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, warm water, holding more moisture. But I think definitely a couple also contributing factors is that Houston is very flat. And there's a lot of people living in places that they weren't living in before. So development definitely has a lot to do. If there was a place that was a natural wetland or was an environmentally endangered land and we're now developing it, there's a lot of issues with drainage and how the storm runoff and how, you know, water comes off houses or businesses. And that's definitely contributes to flooding. So, you know, we have lots of people living in places that haven't necessarily lived there before. And this built system, the built environment, like houses and businesses, definitely influence how you know, our stormwater ability to manage stormwater.
Yeah, that's
And
been a big problem here in the Triangle area in Raleigh where I live. So that's, I think, one of my big concerns is with this amount of rain coming after having so much rain already, you know, where is it all going to go, and can it drain off fast enough? Because there's just been so much development. Now, the city of Raleigh itself has done a lot in the last couple of years to update their what we call green infrastructure, but the county hasn't done as much stuff. So that's going to be something really interesting to see. I was excited to see the city of Raleigh and people posting that to help your city out by going around in any storm drains that are covered with leaf or litter, like go ahead and clear all that away. Don't just brush it away, like get it off the street and away, so that, you know, all the drains are cleared and not blocked. And I thought that was a great, you know, great community thing we can all be doing.
Yeah,
So,
always. And that's always, not just in an extreme rainfall event like now.
right. Yeah. Right. Well, with these heavy summer rainfalls, yeah, that's definitely something. So what about tornadoes? You know, we in Raleigh, where I live, you know, a couple years ago, we had one come right through downtown. They're not unheard of, just normal like weather patterns for this area of the state. You know, is this going to mainly be a rain and wind event, or should we be worried about the tornado aspect as well?
So with any hurricane, there definitely is tornadoes associated. It has the potential to create tornadoes. But usually, when we look at hurricanes, we divide a hurricane into 4 different quadrants. And so the way that you divide it is, I'm going to do a little demonstration with my pencil here. So we have the storm kind of moving from the tip of my pencil towards the eraser. So it's west northwest. The storm is coming from the Atlantic and moving this way. The way that we divide the storm is, this is the center of the storm. You're going to kind of do a cross. So this is my other line. This is quadrant 1. This will be quadrant 2. This down here will be quadrant 3. And this will be quadrant 4. And due to the dynamics of hurricanes, we know that tornadoes are most likely in this first quadrant right here. And that just has to do with, you know, how hurricanes work. So definitely tornadoes are possible in any of the quadrants, but they're most likely in this first quadrant here. So if we have this storm moving here and through, you're going to know that this quadrant always has the highest potential for tornadoes. And then also something else to note is that this 1 quadrant and this 2 quadrant is always what we call the dirty side of a storm.
I was about to ask that because I heard somebody say, probably one of the weather guys, that if you're on the right side of the eye when it comes in, that's where you're going to have the greatest storm surge and the greatest impact. So that's the tornado quadrant. That same, yeah. Okay.
That first one. So that's always the worst part of the storm. So
how big does that quadrant go out? Because with the track shifting south of Raleigh now, yeah, we're on the right. We're like, you know, we're in that quadrant now. Is that, but we're a little like, how do you tell that quadrant?
I mean, I think it's just based on the size of the storm. So it's basically anything from like, you know, it's almost, I mean, it's not perfect. You kind of divide it into 4 perfect quadrants, but it's really depending on how big of how big the storm is. So it's anywhere from the center of circulation out until the outermost area of, because, you know, the closer you get to the center of the storm, you're going to have more hurricane conditions. The farther you move, you're going to have tropical storm conditions. So it's really um, that entire span from the center of the storm to the outermost part of the storm.
Wow. That goes back to the song, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Right? Which side are you going to be on? Not that there's any good side of the storm to be on in a hurricane, right?
Right.
So let's see. We didn't really close this out when we were talking about the mountain rainfall that can happen. More rainfall because of interacting with the mountains. Landslides is something, of course, that's a big concern. And, you know, we talked about development and all of that. So can you talk to us just here in the last little bit here, your thoughts on the storm and, you know, Hurricane Florence compared to things other things you've seen? And is this, you know, as someone who's gone through two really big hurricanes, you live in Miami, you know, and you've worked in this field for a long time, like what's your gut telling you about this storm?
Well, my gut, like any other storm, I mean, I definitely treat all storms with, I look at them very seriously, because I know that no matter if it's a tropical storm or a hurricane, it definitely has the potential to impact life and property and homes, and more importantly, the place that you love, the place that you call home. That was definitely something that I thought about last year around this time, when we were looking at potential Category 5 directly impacting Miami, Hurricane Irma. So my gut is telling me that this is a large storm, that the impacts are going to be storm surge and rainfall, and that no matter where you live, that you need to prepare and take it seriously and listen to your local authorities. If you're under a mandatory evacuation, please leave, because police and fire, they're very brave. But at a certain point, they cannot risk their lives to go in and save somebody. It has to be safe for them to go out there. And so I think that the preparations need to be done now. You need to have a plan. There's lots of websites. I know that you put one on.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to end on that. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, so, you know, FEMA has one, and if there's it's basically, you have to do what you feel is right for your family and take the plans and do what you can. But definitely listen to the local authorities. You know, these hurricane guides check off, make sure that you have enough water, that you have batteries, that you have backup power for your cell phone. If you have a landline, then that's going to be a little bit more reliable during storms. And certainly after storms, if you're going to lose power, most likely there's these hurricane force winds are no serious joke. But I know that if you prepare and you take this storm seriously, then you can survive it. And then I think the most beautiful part of after a storm is that it brings communities together, and that it brings people, no matter who they are, together.
Good, the humanity in people. Hey, Dana. Hey, love. Thanks for joining us. Dana's on.
Hey, Dana.
Yeah, and on my Instagram, if y'all don't follow me on Instagram, follow Harmonizing Strategies. There, I posted a quote about overcoming fear by Nelson Mandela, because, you know, this has been an emotional roller coaster. I was like, last night, y'all, I was crying. My best friend Carly, she called because I texted her, and I was like, just so emotional, and, you know, it's just so overwhelming, and try to get all your normal stuff done, but then also like preparing to shelter in place and preparing to evacuate. And then I woke up this morning crying because I forgot it was 9/11 today, and my sister was in New York, and you know, I try to avoid, you know, social media on 9/11. And so when you and I planned this yesterday, I wasn't thinking like today was 9/11. So I've had a very emotional 24 hours, and, you know, I think a lot of us who are watching the coverage and in the cone of uncertainty are having those emotions too. And I think we all need to, you know, come together and reach out to each other for sure. And, I think, right now in our country, especially, we need people, to see that good side in humanity, that love thy neighbor, as a friend of mine said today, come out in people. So, um, I hope that that is the outcome of this. It's a positive, happy outcome for people, even though we know what's ahead of us is really uncertain and probably sad. Um, Here's my prep list. You see, I still have a lot to cross off. Um, and then this is the night before. So my son is with his dad tonight, and he'll be with me during the storm. And I haven't decided yet if we're staying or going, because my evacuation plan is to go to Western North Carolina, where I grew up, in Asheville, where my parents are. And actually, I was supposed to be there this weekend anyway for my cousin's baby shower. Now, everything's on hold because if the storm tracks west, I might be better off staying in Raleigh. But yeah, you were talking about tips, and I put my list together, and parenting during a storm is something I've thought a lot about. And I think that as parents, Glennon Doyle Melton had this great quote about when she was going through her divorce, and she called a friend and asked, what do I do? Like, the kids are looking at me, and she's like, Glennon, you are the flight attendant on the plane that's going down. Just keep serving the peanuts with a smile, And I think, the kids, they look to us as adults to see, like, should I be freaking out about this? This is my son's first hurricane. We had a snowstorm the beginning of this year where we lost power. We made it fun, and we camped out in the living room. And my best girlfriend, Carly, last night reminded me, just make this fun. Like, her and her kids are going to bake a cake and probably eat it for breakfast. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. You could bake a cake now before the power goes out, and then have to eat on it, or brownies and things like that. So end on a little bit of a more happy note. We talked about one of the things she and I talked about. We met when we were in college. And, in college, we would be throwing a hurricane party, right? But now we're grown-ups with children. She's got 2 kids and 3 elderly dogs, and a property. So it's like, it's a different thing. But with our kids, we can make it our own version of fun, and, our own version of partying, right?
Yeah. And letting them know that, mommy and daddy, or mommy, and have a plan, and that they're going to be safe as long as you're together, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think so too. We're one of my things on my to-do list in prepping to go through a storm with kids and no technology is to hit up the library. We're going tomorrow when he gets off the bus. We're going to get a bunch of new books. I'd already organized all my non-electronic games and have them ready to go. And I've got no bake. We're going to make trail mix, because you can do that when the power's out. It's just combining things. It doesn't have to be refrigerated. I found a no bake, like you mix dates and oats together recipe. So got that on hand that we can do together. Hey, Sarah. And so I think, it can be really overwhelming and intense, which is where I got to last night. But then my friend kind of helped me bring me back around to, like, okay, but like, this, this could be fun in a way, and they're going to look to us to, make sure that, the peanuts are still being served with a smile, right? It's going to be okay.
Yep.
So, all right. Well, before we wrap up, are there any questions from you all who joined kind of midway through? Give it a second. Karina, thank you so much. I learned so much. I think Laura Burns's kids in Ohio, I think they just passed a class on science watching for their homeschool. So thank you all joining us from afar and from in North Carolina. I'm going to post the video. This is the first time I've done a live, and I will try to post it right away and save it. Wish me luck. Hey, Crystal. Oh, y'all, our friend Crystal's on. Donate to her GoFundMe. Her brain surgery is later this month. Thanks for joining, Crystal and Tanner. Crystal's an amazing mom advocate out of Texas who was exposed to pollution in her community, and unfortunately has had a lot of health issues, as well as her son. And she has to have brain surgery to take a cyst out. She's calling it the guest, cystilia. There's a GoFundMe page on Harmonizing Strategies page and on my page. Please go donate. Help us cover her medical expenses. So, all right, we're going to say goodbye. Karina, thank you so much. you're such a wealth of information. I've worked with you for years and I learned so much tonight.
All right. Thank you so much for having me and for being your inaugural live video. Really, everyone, please stay safe, stay informed, and everything will be okay.
Thanks. Bye, y'all. Stay safe.
Bye.